welcome to the Faith and Fandom podcast. This is the Artist Alley Aftermath edition for Empire Comic Con 2024. Empire Comic Con is a con that is now in Springfield, Georgia, formerly Savannah, Georgia, and this is their fifth year since starting, and I think there was a COVID year. They didn't happen. Maybe somewhere in there. Pretty sure. But yeah, this is a single day show, and it's a variation. It goes through a lot of highs and lows and differentiations that make it unique. And so let's just jump into it. This is I've only missed one Empire Comic Con, and it was last year because it was scheduled on a wedding. The first year was in Savannah, and that was if you dive down into the depths of my podcast at some point, I interview the showrunner before the show comes out because he was taking on a very ambitious swing at a big show. And then a couple years later, we did a smaller one, but they had the young lady slash woman who did the voice of Ash Ketchum to be there, and had good experiences. And then they were there 2 years ago, and it's just been it's been a good experience, and even in all its changes. But this is October, and I say this to anytime I'm telling people about just the cycles of my life. October is just fall's July for me. I'm in the process of where I've got an activity every single day, and sometimes multiple activities a day, for about the last 2 weeks of October, at least. And so I DJ'd Thursday night for a trunk or treat event. I DJ'd Friday night for a trunk or treat event. Then immediately got in my car and drove to Hardyville, South Carolina, which is right on the the South Carolina Georgia border. And I stayed in probably the most suspect hotel I've stayed in a very long time. Now, I stayed in this very suspect hotel because it was just me. None of my kids were going, and I didn't have to worry as much about standards because it was just me. I literally packed a bed sheet and a can of Lysol just in case. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad. I paid $65 for this hotel room, and by golly, I got my $65 worth. That and the yogurt and coffee that I took the next morning, I got my $65 worth. But I couldn't drive down that early because it's about a 3.5 hour drive. But yeah. When I got to the con that first thing that morning, went to go set up. And one of the things, this takes place at the Clarence Morgan Event Center, which is kind of like a big sports complex. And there's a gym. And the con takes place now inside a multi-purpose gym there in Springfield. And, as I pulled up, I see a full parking lot. And I'm like, oh crap. Do we have that many vendors? Is this that big of a show now? And all these things. And so I go through that whole range of emotions of oh, this is a big deal. And it's still early in the morning, right at 8 o'clock. It's still foggy enough you can't see very far. And the cars weren't there for the con. The cars were there for all the sports, the baseball and Little League. Now, that didn't mean it wasn't going to have people attending it, but like it was just kind of that like oh, they're not here for us. So I went in and started setting up, and one of the first things that happened was when the showrunner Hugo showed me where my table was. The people, the two tables down from me, had set up their booths backwards. So their booths were facing the wrong directions, and they had put everything on the wrong direction. So I'm just quietly, you know, trying not to look astonished or like more mourning for them the fact they were going to have to redo everything, because I would have been pretty sad at that point, but it worked out. And there was a young lady beside me who made jewelry and necklaces and art and stuff like that, and she was asking about the Snorlax that I had brought, and we were talking about some music things, and she, just kept asking me some questions about some of my stuff. And when she found out that I had the 5 foot tall Snorlax beanbag, she says, "I don't know if I like you or if I want to be you." But she started off like, "I don't know if I like you," and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." But then she finished it with, "Or if I want to be you," and I was like, "Oh, cool." Thanks for making me feel like this is about to be really awkward. But it was neat, and she was pretty cool to hang out with. She saw a VeggieTales sticker, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I know what VeggieTales is. I have religious trauma." And I'm like, "You're 12. You're like 14 tops. Like you're not in that place where VeggieTales can be your religious trauma yet." The fact that you're watching VeggieTales at this point in time means either somebody is showing you that because they love it, or you're watching it for kicks and giggles. But like, I don't know if there are still churches out there showing VeggieTales to kids. If there are, maybe it's the Netflix version. I don't know. But I thought that was an interesting way for things to start. I got the booth set up, sat down, started working on some of the drawings for the weekend and kind of catching up, doing some graphics for church. And I didn't have a lot of time to get ready, but I had a little bit of time. And there was a coffee shop that was set up just a couple rows over, which was delightful. And I gave them large sums of money for different beverages throughout the day. But one of the first people to come to my booth that morning, I'm 3.5 hours away. I haven't been to this show in 2 years. I don't expect to have like much of a presence there. And one of the first people that came up was a dude in one of my shirts, and it was the Batman shirt, which means that dude was one of the first people to buy that shirt, because the last time I was there was October of 2022. That means I had just gotten that shirt made, and that was the first time that shirt had existed, and he picked it up. So thought that was pretty cool. But we didn't talk a lot, but we talked a little bit. But I just thought it was neat that the dude wore one of my shirts to the con, and then he bought more shirts and more books, and he came back a couple times, and I was grateful for that. I was like, oh, I guess kind of still have an impact with this. And then I got to talk to a dude named Brennan who, it was one of those things like coming at the gate, because if you are familiar with Faith and Fandom's past history, I used to have a friend and art partner named Vincent who traveled with me to shows, and was a big part of the beginning of Faith and Fandom. And he was somebody I expected to have in my life for the rest of my life. Like, I'm talking matching tattoos, high fives forever type person in my life. And he's not in my life in that capacity now. And, but I always associate him with this con, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But I see a young man coming towards me who looks a lot like Vincent, down to the nose rings and stuff. And, I saw this guy walk up, and I had that split thought of like, it's Vincent. And then I was like, oh, no, it's not Vincent. But we started talking, and I had a really encouraging conversation with Brennan about con ministry, about life, about art, about the struggle of finding your place in art and ministry. He was telling me about a new tabletop game that he's putting together, and and I'm telling you, this dude's put a lot of really interesting thought and planning into this game, and it's very creative, and I'm genuinely looking forward to hearing more about it and telling you more about it when it drops. And I was just talking to him, and it was just one of those really like, kingdom ordained conversations, and I was really grateful to be a part of it. Yeah, I was really glad to be a part of it. And we talked for a while, and I was just, it was good to meet him. It was a good encouragement, and I was grateful to be around him. And he also gave me a vibe. And if I don't know how to explain this to people unless you know it, but like, there is a art school called SCAD, and SCAD students have a vibe. They just have a vibe. And I told Brennan, I was like, hey, you give me SCAD vibes. He's like, oh, I graduated from SCAD. I'm like, there you go. There you go. And that's not an insult or anything. It's just like, you people have an artistic mindset that you can tell after they've been through there. But it was cool meeting him. And then there's a dad that came through with him and his kid had matching Wile E. Coyote t-shirts. And he just wanted to give me a donation because he loved what the ministry was. And it's just like, so between the dude in the shirt, between Brennan, between this dad, I was just like getting a lot of like kind of piled on encouragement at this show, which was pretty neat. Really grateful for that. I'm going to say something, and I don't mean this to be any kind of like slander or judgment or condemnation. I'm just stating it's a unique situation, and it's the first time I've seen it. I saw for the first time female Boy Scouts. Like, I know I'd heard that mentioned, but I've never like met female kids who were actually in Boy Scouts, like not Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. There were 2 young ladies, maybe I actually think by the end of the day there were 4 young ladies there who were in the Boy Scouts, and they were selling food as a Boy Scout fundraiser, like pepperoni rolls, sandwiches, popcorn, stuff like that. And I was grateful for the pepperoni rolls because they were affordable, because the food truck that was there had like $20 chicken legs and stuff like that, and barbecue sandwiches. But I also didn't want to go wait in a food truck line when I'm by myself. So I popped some pepperoni rolls. And I just thought it was interesting because I've never seen young ladies in Boy Scouts, like where your uniform says Boy Scout. So just, it reminds me of that one Parks and Rec episode with the Scout stuff, but it was still cool. A little bit later on in the show, a dude named Daniel came by, and Daniel and I had met a couple years ago, but Daniel walked up and asked me about 5 Iron Frenzy because he remembered I had said something about that, and he'd seen stuff on my socials. And, we talked about it, and he edits Reese Roper's podcast, and we talked for, let's say 30, 40 minutes just about music and about faith and struggling and church ministry and how hard it is to do things like that. And had a really good conversation. Had a really good conversation for those things. A little bit later, somebody came by and we were talking about video games and comics and Jesus and stuff like that. And somebody says, this makes me happy as a gamer and a Christian. And I was like, I'll take that. That's a pretty good acknowledgement there. From the coffee place, they also did kind of like mixed non-alcoholic drinks that had organic energy stuff in it, and I got the Scarlet Witch blend, and yeah, it's pretty good. And so I think during my time there, I had 2 large coffees and a Scarlet Witch blend drink, and I ate my main form of sustenance, minus those 2 pinwheels that I got from the Boy Scouts, was a bag of jalapeno Cheetos that somebody had put in my pastor appreciation box at church that I had thrown in my car on the way in. And so the day had gone pretty steadily and consistently, talking to people and everything. And so it had not occurred to me that my Nintendo Switch was in the car and I could be playing Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. And so finally, as we got down to like the last hour and a half of the show, I was like, all right, it's kind of dying down. I'm going to go grab my Switch and I'm going to play a little bit of Zelda. And as soon as I grabbed my Switch, a group, like a gaggle of teenagers came by the booth, and a dude, after talking for a minute, asked me, could I sketch something that wasn't in the book? Would it still be $1? And so he wanted Supreme Gohan, which was the adult to teenager-ish version of Gohan that fights Boo. So I took some time and I drew him a version of that. And then right behind him was another young lady who was there. And the group literally stood there. The gaggle of teenagers stood there and waited for me to finish the sketch. And it wasn't quick. It was at least 20 minutes. Because I did all the color and inks and all that jazz. And then the young lady asked me if I could do the same thing, do a sketch for her for $1. But she had a very unique request. She wanted the group Daft Punk, which, if you're not familiar, are EDM to techno to club music from 2 dudes in helmets that look like Destiny, the video game characters. And so I will do my best. And I probably put 40 minutes into this. And, one of the things they were saying is like, you're doing a lot for $1. And the reality is, of this, and I mentioned this in my congregation on Sunday. I told them about this as I was speaking on Sunday morning, is I'm not doing any of this stuff for the $1. I'm doing it for the time and the conversations, because literally for the 40 minutes I stood there sketching, I got to talk and invest in people and do things that made them feel seen and worthwhile. And doing a sketch on a card of Daft Punk was definitely not in my wheelhouse, and it was way more complicated than I wanted it to be, but I tried, and I feel like I did a pretty good job. But yeah, then the show kind of ended and packed up, and surprisingly, I think I technically did better financially at this show than I did at the 2-day Fayetteville show. I haven't actually counted my box from either show. Like I tell you guys, the money's not the focus, but I get the little statement from Square saying, hey, you did this many credit card sales. And I was $10 off on the credit card sales from the 2 days at Fayetteville. And knowing that people may have also paid with cash, there's a good chance that I did better at this than I did the 2-day Fayetteville show, which is kind of surprising because it is a smaller show. And I say this with all the respects in the world and no shade, because I don't poo-poo on shows 99% of the time. Because I've helped in the past with marketing and social media and stuff for this show. Like I made a video for the first one. And I helped with some of the graphics at different points. But this was one of the shows that they did not do a lot of social media promotion. And some maybe like 6 to 8 weeks before the show, I had a conversation with the showrunner, and I was like, hey, here's, if I were to lay out a plan of how often and what and how and why you would post on social media, and I laid out a kind of a suggestive idea. And he said, I hear that social media is not my jam. Also, that he didn't want to list all of his vendors or highlight them because other shows were trying to steal them, and I get that. And so, I was like, what? It's his rodeo. They're friends of mine. I'm going to show up, even if it doesn't look like heavily marketed. And they still had a good enough turnout for that. But when I was talking to Hugo, who's the showrunner, at the end, as I was packing stuff up, he came over to the booth and we were chatting for a while. As I was packing, another artist came over and started giving him a long speech about how he needed to do better on social media. Now, I feel like it was respectfully, had that conversation with him, months prior to the show. I don't think that's something you need to go dropping on a showrunner at the end of their shows. Like, hey, you could have done better, and here's why you should do better, and here's your suggestions. So just as a, con attender, I would say don't poo-poo on people's shows as literally people are still packing up. Because if it was a great show, you're ruining their experience. If it was a not great show, you're heightening their sad. So don't do that. That's a con party foul. It's like don't criticize where they are literally as the show is still fresh on their breath. So it was a good show. It was a good time. Had a good experience. One thing that was a negative for me, and this is not show related, I got kind of sad personally on my way home because like I had mentioned even when I met Brennan, is that Vincent was on my mind, and this show in 2019 was the show that was kind of like either the collision or the detour of where our friendship and partnership was kind of going away. I was heading to this show in Savannah when it was at its biggest, and they were making Vincent and I guests. And we, there was a thing where I'd gotten a hotel room and he wanted to ride with me, and, stuff happened. But either way, we had our first and maybe technically only falling out that night as I was heading down there. So on my first time driving down to Savannah for that show, I was already kind of an emotional wreck. And I realized that why this was hitting me more now than the other times, because this is my first time driving to Savannah alone since then. That every other time I've got a kid with me. And so driving this road alone really just kind of put those thoughts back in my mind, and it made me miss the friendship, and it made me miss the partnership, and it made me sad for how things turned out. And so I was kind of in my feels with that because, listen, I feel the feels, man. They're in there. They are a real deal. And it's stuff I can't really always avoid, is how this stuff makes me feel, especially with all the road travel and everything else and being away from people and disappointments and things like that. It makes it hard not to really kind of get lost in that sometimes. But yeah, either way, the experience was good. Everything with it, I was grateful to be able to go. My only regret further on the route home was that I did not have enough gas to make it to Buc-ee's without stopping. Because I wanted to be able to stop at Buc-ee's and then get a sandwich at Buc-ee's and then keep on going. But that did not happen. So I had to stop 20 minutes before Buc-ee's, and that made me really sad. But yeah, it was a good show. Meeting the people that I got to meet was neat. Uh, there was also a dude there who had a Foot Locker square cube that was like a Nintendo Highlight cube. It had a Link on it, a Mario scene, a Super Mario Brothers scene, and I had this exact trunk when I was a kid, and I loved this thing. And the dude had it there, and I'd literally not seen that thing since I was like maybe 9 years old, and he had it there. It was $225, which is bonkers. There are also some funny stickers that I picked up. One is a name tag says "Hello, I'm pretending to know what I'm doing." There's a D&D one I picked up, but it was a good experience. I had a good time. I feel like I got to be an encouragement. I got to feel like I was encouraged, and unless something changes, this is my next to last show for the year. The last show that I have planned currently is Boone Comic Con on November 16th, and that will do me for the year. Now, there's some other shows that might pop up in December, but kind of rounding up to that home stretch of where cons are a little bit less, home for the holidays, and I can work on writing and all the things. So, pretty excited about that. And I didn't get to even make any distance on Legend of Zelda when I was playing it, but I took a little bit of time today on a lunch break and finally got to the next dungeon that I was in. So, thanks. I know you were concerned. Before I wrap up here, I want to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters for being as awesome as you are and encouraging as you are. And yeah, just thanks for being who you are. So our Patreon supporters would like to thank Lynn Turner, David Brooks, Jeff Weimer, Colin Sproles, Jamie Montgomery, the Coleman family, Jonathan Herman, Ron Petit, Gear Saber Cosplay, Scott Ward, Alicia Glenn, Candace Davis, Jay Sheed, Jason Crutchfield, Mike Perna, Todd Turner, John Jacobs, Zach Harris, Caleb Grimm, Jeanette Skaggs, Jason Bullock, Christina Ray, Sarah Lewis, Patrick Gale, Rebecca Godlove, and Adam Davis. Thank you all for supporting the way that you do, for being as encouraging as you are, and I'm just incredibly grateful for you. So thank y'all for taking the time to listen, and I hope to see you at a con real soon. Bye.